Hi, my name is Juliana Mitchell. This is my cat Chiku, and this is a video on caring for the SI joint or the sacroiliac joint, specifically relative to the way we use our body when we get out of a car or the way we roll onto our side from lying on our back. The way that we get out of a car or the way that we roll to our side from lying on our back can be done if done repeatedly and repeatedly in the same way, in a way that actually can aggravate this joint right here. I'll talk just very briefly a little bit more about this joint right here, or can be done mindfully in a way so as not to aggravate this joint. So this is a pelvis. And this bone right here is called your sacrum. It's the majority of the back of your pelvis. It's the center of the back of your pelvis. And when I say SI joint, the S is sacrum, is this bone right here. It's framed by these bones on either side that look like elephant ears. And individually, they're called ilium, or two of them are called an ilia, starting with the letter I. And that's the I in the SI joint. A joint is a place where two bones meet. And here we have the sacrum meeting an ilium on both sides. And so the meeting point of those two bones, the sacral bone and the two ilia, is the SI joint. We want the SI joint to, by and large, be a joint of stability because the entire upper body pours its weight down the spine, and our lowest low back vertebra transfers all the weight down into the sacrum, down into the pelvis through this tiny little, maybe 1.5-inch area. And so we really want that to be integrous, solid, stable. The SI joint does have a little bit of movement. It has a little wiggle in its walk. We want it to have just a little give, but we want that give to give evenly, left, right, and for it to be able to fall quite symmetrically in the center for neutral. In the body, those born of the female sex who go through sexual maturity as a female, we have a hormone called relaxin, which acts on our joints during menstruation, ovulation, pregnancy, and breastfeeding, that makes the joints more wobbly. So it is somewhat more common that this important weight-bearing, stabilizing joint can get wobbly in the female body. But it's not only in women. It also shows up in male ballet dancers. It shows up a lot in people who practice hot yoga and people who practice vinyasa yoga. I'm making a commitment that on a future date, we'll talk a little bit more about how we might modify our vinyasa practice to take better care of this joint. So when one side of this joint gets a little more wiggly than the other, has an asymmetrical drag on it, that can cause pain. And that pain and instability is called SI joint instability or SI joint dysfunction. It is experienced as about a quarter-sized, nagging, dull discomfort on one of these areas, which would feel to a lot of people, some would think of that as low back, some would think of that as the back of their buttocks. That's how it gets experienced in some people's bodies. And in other people's bodies, it might be much more sharp, much more significant. It could radiate up into the low back. It could intermingle with sciatic nerve pain. It could create a transference of pain that could come forward into the groin. So let's take a moment now, and I'm going to need to kick the cat off the chair, which breaks my heart, to show you what it is that I'm referencing relative to how getting out of the car could predispose us to SI joint instability, or probably more likely, if SI joint instability was already present, aggravated. But before I kick the cat off the chair, pretending it is my car seat and model the getting out of the car, let me just say that, so in my body, if I'm not being mindful, my right thigh turns out, my right foot turns out, and I'll lean a little heavier on that foot. by doing that again and again and again and again, I lengthen the inner groin, inner thigh muscles, and at my back body, I shorten the tissues that go from the thigh bone in toward the SI joint. They get shortened and tightened by my doing that asymmetrical action again and again. Thereby, when I'm walking, there can be an asymmetrical drag. The tissues don't have an even flow left and right, and that asymmetrical drag can create a torque which can kind of nag at and pull at the SI joint. So where possible, not that we always have to stand symmetrically, but if you're going to hang out on one side for a few breaths, hang out on the other side for a few breaths, and where you can, come back to center. Now let's bring that idea into the sitting in the car and the getting out of the car. Ms. Chiku, you can share the seat with me, or you can give me the seat, but I'm sorry, you cannot have the seat all to yourself anymore. Okay, let's meow. All right. What happens for most people getting out of the car is, let's say I'm in the driver's seat, left thigh swings out. That action is called abduction. And then the rest of the pelvis and the other thigh follow. So to do that from facing you, that would be to say, left thigh swings out again and again, and this turns in. Left thigh swings out again, this turns in, which over time will lengthen the tissues of the inner thigh, shortening the muscles of the outer hip and the back of the pelvis, or shortening the abductors and the external rotators. One of which is a muscle called your piriformis. The piriformis goes from the sacrum to your outer hip, and I think it's the only muscle that crosses the SI joint. So it's the only muscle that crosses this really important stabilizing joint. You don't want one of them short and the other long to the degree that you can help it. Thereby, to protect the SI joint, or especially for those of you who already have SI joint instability, I want to propose that you do a little sideways scoot, bring the two legs together, step out of the car that way. Similarly, getting back into this car, scoot your butt in and keeping the thighs as parallel as you can, do a little scooch around. Now, some people have pointed out, well, but don't you balance it out by swinging the leg out, turning, getting up, and then sitting in, swinging the opposite leg and coming back. And, okay, yeah, that's true to a degree. But for whatever reason in human movement, this getting out of the car action seems to be exaggerated. Also, let's note that you're coming to that thigh swing out from having sat, and sitting kind of sucks. Sitting was designed to kill us. Whereas when we're coming back into the car, at least we have been upright. It doesn't seem to be quite as much how people move. There tends to be a little more of a scoot back in. But nonetheless, yes, point taken. There's a one thigh swings out, we get up, the opposite thigh swings in. Nonetheless, if your SI joint is vulnerable, you might want to try and keep the thighs parallel on the way out of the car and on the way into the car. All right, let me now take this same idea into how we roll onto our side from lying on our back. What frequently happens to roll onto the side from being on our back is one thigh opens, pelvis and thigh follows. It's the exact same thing as the getting out of the car that I just spoke about. So where possible from lying on the back, once the legs have stepped in, if you can keep the thighs parallel and let the two thighs move together with the pelvis, there's a lot to be said for that. There is a strong preference in the yoga world to roll onto the right hand side after being in a resting pose. And I want to suggest it can be beautiful to roll to the left as well, and might be very nice to alternate. So in addition to keeping the thighs fairly parallel when rolling to the side, or in fact, when coming into a pose. I want to take a moment and even speak about how we step the legs in, which can have a less positive or a more positive effect on the stability of the pelvis. So when the legs are out, it is natural that they will roll open. The feet are heavy, and our heavy thigh muscle, quadricep muscle, is more on the outer edge of the leg. So it's natural that the legs will roll open when we are in a relaxed state. But that's not the best state from which to step the legs in. Our psoas muscle isn't well lined up to draw the legs in, and our SI joint is less protected. So I want to suggest that before stepping the legs in from lying on your back, we turn the toes and kneecaps up, almost slightly in. That will create an integrity. And then we'll use the low belly to hold the low back down to the ground. And when I say use the low belly to hold the low back down to the ground, not for a second am I saying that's how we should be most of the time or all the time when we're lying on our back, just to prepare a stabilizing for the movement. Toes up, knees up, almost slightly in. I'm going to bring my low belly to my low back and my low back to the floor. And holding my low back and pelvis stable, I'm going to have the intention not to let the pelvis wobble as I step one leg in and then the other leg in. Then I can release, then the low back might lift. Now, since I stepped the right leg in first this time, it would be nice if I can remember to step the left leg in next time, just to the degree that I can remember. Now I'm going to demonstrate what I would prefer not. So from my legs flopped open, I can actually feel all sorts of places in my body that don't feel stable when I do that. And you might notice the way the pelvis wobbles. There's just not a stability package. So again, toes, knees up, low belly, low back, earth, stable. Try not to wobble the pelvis, one leg, then the other. Parallel thighs roll to the side. Coming upright. On a future date, as I have already mentioned, we'll look at what are some slight shifts that we can make in our vinyasa practice that might contribute some additional stability and care for our SI joint. And in the meanwhile, if you live in a body that was born of the female sex and went through female hormonal maturity, just please be especially mindful of your movements when you're any of ovulating, menstruating, pregnant, or breastfeeding, because our joints have extra laxity. That means less instability, and that can require and deserve greater care. That's what I have to say on this topic today. Thank you so much for joining me.